Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. In 2005, the National Abortion Rights Action League launched a project to mandate abortion services in every hospital in the state of Maryland. A member of the U.S. Congress at the time attached an amendment to a spending bill which negated the pro-abortion lobby efforts to force healthcare doctors, nurses, clinics, hospitals, medical centers, and even health insurance providers from being forced by government to provide, refer, and pay for abortions. Known as the Weldon Amendment, it protects the conscience rights of healthcare workers and organizations across the United States from not having to violate their individual beliefs. On June 21 of 2016, the Obama administration's Department of Health and Human Services violated the Weldon Amendment when it refused to block federal funding to California over its state mandate that all health insurance plans cover abortion procedures. Is this action by California a flagrant disregard of the rule of law? And what does this mean for the rest of the country? Can other states violate the law too? And what about healthcare workers and organizations? Will they be forced against their conscience to assist in, refer, and perform abortions? And what about organizations such as churches that teach abortion as an intrinsic evil? Will they pay for the instance for church workers and school teachers' health insurance, which includes abortion? Today's guest will discuss all these issues and much more. Our guest is a medical doctor in internal medicine. He graduated from State University of New York, Buffalo, and was also in the United States Army. He won an election as a Republican in November of 1994 to represent the 15th District of Florida in the U.S. House of Representatives. He served in Congress from January of 1995 to January of 2009. He has since returned to Florida to resume his practice of medicine. Well, welcome, Dr. David Weldon.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Brendan.
Dr. Weldon, can you discuss the origins of the Weldon Amendment, how it came about, and the countervailing forces at the time?
Sure. We had been through a big fight about a year or two prior to me introducing the Weldon Amendment regarding an effort by the American College of Gynecology and Obstetrics where they were trying to force all OBGYN residents to learn how to perform abortions. We eventually stopped that by threatening to cut off their funding that they get through HHS if they continue to go down that path. And at that time, we heard from many pro-life residents in OBGYN, faculty members, program directors who thought that this was an overreach, it was overbearing, it was inappropriate, it violated religious freedom, religious liberty, rights of conscience. And anyway, we were successful in doing that, but I knew the pro-abortion community was, essentially still wanting to force abortion on everybody. I mean, it's not enough for them that it's legal. It's not enough for them that they have Roe versus Wade. It's not enough for them that they have people like Barack Obama in the White House who support and promote abortion rights. They want to force abortion on everybody else. It's basically what they want to do. So it was shortly after that I saw, it was brought to my attention by a staffer that the state of Maryland had announced, basically, that they were going to pursue this initiative to try to get abortion in all of the hospitals in the state of Maryland. And I think some of them were religious institutions that didn't do abortions. And anyway, I had the idea for this amendment, and so I knew there was efforts underway in other spheres to try to promote abortion on people who don't want to do it. And so I came up with the idea for this amendment. It became known as the Weldon Amendment. It was on a spending bill, and essentially what it did is it said, if you're going to violate somebody's conscience rights, you're going to lose your funding through the Department of Health and Human Services, which is, food stamp. Well, no, food stamps is agriculture, but it's like Medicaid and a whole bunch of other health-related funding, and it could be cut off. And so, and it passed, and it was signed into law under President Bush.
And so you were able to make them cease and desist, at least for that time. And does the Hyde Amendment and the Weldon Amendment need to be voted on by Congress every year? And what are the pros and cons to that?
That's a great question, and a lot of people don't really know how the Congress works. You have statutes, basically like a law that says, it's a crime to, say, bribe a federal official, and if you do that, you go to jail. And that requires, just one bill to pass the House and the Senate and the President to sign it. But then every year you also have these funding bills where you have to fund all these different agencies, and that's the annual appropriation cycle. It's actually called for in the Constitution, and a lot of times it's very difficult to pass a statute. So Hyde language, the Weldon language, what ends up happening is you stick it in the appropriation bill, and then it has to get re-voted on every year. And that's what's happened with Weldon and with Hyde. Now, a lot of times they eventually get converted into statute. For example, I had placed in an appropriation bill a restriction on no federal funds being used to patent a human embryo. I had been made aware by some researchers that there were companies that wanted to produce human embryos through cloning to be used in scientific research. So instead of doing research on lab rats, you would now be using human embryos. And I had, in a funding bill, I had put a restriction in there, and then several years later that was actually made into a statute. So you cannot patent a human embryo. So,
well, that's very good news. I didn't know about that. And so are there cons to it as far as, if, say, the Congress changed from Republican to Democrat, could they excise out the amendment or the
yes.
They could, I see.
Yes. Yeah, if you had a Republican House, Republican Senate, switch to Democrat, and if you had a Democrat president, now what you need in the Senate to strip these things out is you need more than 60 votes to strip them out.
Do you need 60? In other words,
you need 60.
60 most of the time, yeah. Now, in 2014, the state of California brazenly rejected or ignored the Weldon Amendment, and they have a very overwhelmingly pro-abortion Democratic legislature, and Jerry Brown is governor. And were they doing this to test the laws, or what do you make of this? Do you feel that it was a brazen attempt to say the state is going to overrule the federal government?
Well, you're asking a great question. I wonder, the person who did this was the insurance commissioner of the state of California. Mm-hmm. And he basically issued an edict that said all health insurance sold in the state of California has to cover abortion. And that's a violation of the Weldon language as it currently exists in law. And I can't help but wonder, did he actually call the Secretary of HHS before he did that, or the Undersecretary, or was there some kind of conversation directly with the Obama administration? But it created a crisis for the Obama administration and the Department of Health and Human Services, because as soon as he did that, he was in violation of the Weldon language, and the Secretary of HHS was supposed to cut off funding through Health and Human Services at that point. And they did not, basically. And then 6 months later, 9 months later, they issue this rule claiming, if you read their rule, that California was not in violation of the Weldon language, which is very Orwellian if you read this thing, because they clearly are. And how they can make that claim is absurd, basically. And it's essentially the Obama administration, Department of Health and Human Services, ignoring the law and allowing California to mandate that every health insurance plan sold in the state of Florida has to offer abortion procedures and cover it. So.
And now, I happened to read Richard Dorflinger's entitled "Pledge Betrayed: Obama Administration Nullifies Conscience Rights," and it seems like they're picking and choosing what they're going to enforce as law, and what they're not going to enforce or they're going to ignore. Is there any way that you can come back? There was that panel held in early June on Capitol Hill. What was the purpose of that panel, and did it have any effect?
Yeah, I was invited to go to Capitol Hill, even though I'm, no longer serving in the House, and serve in a panel discussion that was sponsored by Congressman Joe Pitts, who was on the Health Committee of the Commerce Committee. And we had nurses that were there that were forced to assist in abortion procedures or lose their job. We had pastors from the state of California who were unable to purchase insurance because of their being in the state of California, and it was a very compelling panel. We heard from leaders of the pro-life obstetric and gynecology movement. It was a very informative event, and the most tragic thing about this event is we had these nurses there who one of them had to participate in what is called a partial birth abortion,
Wow.
And where they actually dismembered a late-term infant.
Mm-hmm. Was this nurse, was she in California also?
No, we actually heard from two nurses. They were both in the state of New Jersey, and they were both forced to assist in abortion procedures. One of them was very psychologically traumatized or lose their job, and that was the very purpose of the Weldon Amendment language, was to prevent people from having their jobs threatened, to prevent, pastors from being told, they have to purchase an insurance plan that covers insurance. And, you got the case of Catholic hospitals that could be forced by government agencies to say you must assist or you must allow abortion procedures in your hospital.
That's well. Now, what did you, when you wrote the Weldon Amendment, you used the word healthcare entity. Why would you use that versus, say, healthcare provider or physician when drafting the Weldon Amendment?
Well, actually, the reason I did that was specifically because of my concern that you didn't want it to be narrowly defined based on just whether you're a doctor or a nurse, and my concern was that it would affect insurance companies as well, that the government could come along and say to Aetna, to say to Blue Cross Blue Shield, you have to have abortions as part of your covered treatment modalities under all of your insurance products. And or let's say a self-insured company. Let's say a company is owned by a Catholic CEO, and they self-insure all their employees. A lot of companies do this. They'll use Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna to be the claims processor for them, but they're actually paying the bills themselves right out of their corporate revenue. And you could have insurance regulators in left-wing states saying to these companies, "Oh, you have to offer abortions as part of your benefits for your employees." So that is why I phrased that way. I didn't want it to just be confined to doctors and nurses.
I see. And the Obama administration, do you believe that they are in defiance of the intent and the language of the law?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about that. But that's not the only thing it's not the only laws they violated. The Obama administration has been notorious for this since they came in, almost 8 years ago now, that they, pick and choose which laws they want to enforce and which ones they want to ignore. And it's very clear that this administration didn't like the Weldon language, and so they're choosing to ignore it flat out. And even though it was not repealed, it's still in the statute. And I would assume, following this election, if Mr. Trump were to win, he would enforce it, and Mrs. Clinton would continue the Obama policy of not enforcing it.
Mm-hmm. Now, is the right of conscience fundamental to our American freedoms, and if so, how so?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because for much of modern history, you can, if we're at war, you can file as a conscientious objector. And it used to be you had to base your objections on religious objections, and most people were Quakers or some sort of Christian sect, and they would quote the Bible, "Thou shalt not kill." And of course, in that situation, refusing to go to war, the person who you don't want to kill wants to kill you, basically. So it's either kill or be killed in the state of combat. But we allow people who take a conscientious objection, and we don't use the term religious objection because you can actually qualify as a conscientious objector as an atheist. But we are denying that in the case of abortion, and so these nurses that were forced to participate, this administration does not want to give them the same rights that we would give somebody who was drafted into combat and wants to not participate. And the ultimate irony is we're not talking about the enemy in combat, we're talking about an innocent baby. And so in the eyes of this administration, conscientious objection is okay, except if you want to object to killing unborn babies. And then you can be forced to do that or lose your job. And if you choose not to participate, if you're a nurse and you choose not to participate and you lose your job, you have no rights to go to court for being fired unfairly, basically in the eyes of this administration.
Well, that's really sad. Now, is California's flagrant disregard mean that the rest of the country can do what California is doing right now?
Well, I'm afraid so. It's very unfortunate, but once they did this, the word is out basically, and so you can basically, as long as Obama's in the White House or somebody of the same philosophy is in the White House, that rights of conscience protection they do not apply to abortion. Is basically, you may be able to make rights of conscience protection under other circumstances, but there's no right of protection when it comes to abortion.
Mm-hmm. And for instance, that pastor that testified from California, that believe abortion is intrinsic evil, is he being forced to provide health insurance coverage to his employees?
Yes, he has to provide health insurance coverage under Obamacare if he has more than 50 employees. And in the state of California, he will have to purchase health insurance that covers abortion procedures, even though he feels that it's a violation of the Bible, even though he feels that it's an intrinsic evil. And it is killing, in my opinion. It's killing innocent life. But that's where we've come to. You know, religious freedom and religious liberty is under attack in America, and it's been under attack for years, and it's under attack from this administration, and it's only going to continue, and it's only going to get worse as long as you have people like Barack Obama in the White House.
Mm-hmm. And Hillary Clinton would be a follow-up, I think.
I think she's got the potential to be worse. You know, she's even a more outspoken advocate for homosexual rights, and you know what their agenda is above and beyond, you know, just the abortion debate. They would like to stifle freedom of speech, for example. Like, you can't read certain sections of the Bible in public, which would be their next step, because there's sections in the Bible that condemn homosexual behavior, and they would like to define that as hate speech, and that if you talk about that at all in any kind of public setting, you'd be subject to prosecution under some sort of hate speech restrictions.
I see. Now, has the House of Representatives voted on legislation from Representative John Fleming of Louisiana and Diane Black of Tennessee to codify the Weldon Amendment? And what is its status currently?
Yeah, they didn't exactly take the Weldon language. What they did, it more or less accomplishes the same thing. It gives people whose conscience rights are being violated a right of action in court. And they passed it out of the House. It passed overwhelmingly. There were a few Republican no's and a few Democrat yeses. And it's over in the Senate right now. And it's up to, you know, Republicans in the Senate to try to get it passed after the election. Unfortunately, Mr. Obama has said he will veto it. So
would it have to be reintroduced in the next legislative session beginning in January of 2017?
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. It would have to be voted on all over again. And, you know, the fate of this, and I want to be very, very clear to your viewers, and this case of this nurse in New Jersey, she's a pro-life Catholic, and she was forced by the hospital she worked in. They were doing a midterm abortion where the doctor dismembers the baby in the uterus and removes the body parts, and her job was to lay all the body parts of this baby out on a table and make sure all the body parts were there so that the abortion was complete. And she was forced to do that under threat that she would lose her job if she did not assist. And it left her deeply psychologically scarred. She ended up leaving that hospital, and she has no right to petition the court for redress under this administration. And what the Conscience Protection Act, the bill that passed the House, basically says is that she could go to court and say she was fired unfairly for refusing to participate in this procedure, this grisly, brutal procedure.
No question about it. And a procedure that's also unsafe for the mother. Of course, the later the term the pregnancy is. Dr. Weldon, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show today and giving your thoughts, and hopefully the Weldon Amendment, I guess it all depends on the election, what happens in November.
Yes.
As far as will the Weldon Amendment continue on, or will this new legislation get passed in the House and in the Senate and signed by someone who is pro-life in the White House?
Yeah, it's really come down to elections matter, and who wins matters. And in this case, are your rights of conscience going to be protected? So it was great to be on the show with you. I got to get back to seeing patients. So
Very well.
God bless.
All right, thank you, Dr. Weldon.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye now. And we hope you found today's show to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Certainly the healthcare industry needs to have protection of conscious rights. Organizations like ACOG are trying to wipe them out. And that's why there's a counter group called the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, which is pro-life. And it's something to be aware of, that these countervailing forces in our society pushing back and forth and really having an impact across all strata of society. Well, thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.
Hi, I'm Colby Mazzarella. Welcome to Life Matters, where we interview guests who protect human life from conception to natural death. Today's guest is C.J. Doyle, the Executive Director of Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. Hi, C.J., welcome to the show.
Colby, delighted to be here.
Thank you. Tell us a little about the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts and how do you defend human life?
The Catholic Action League was founded in 1995. We were the former Massachusetts chapter of a national organization, the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights. And in 1995, we became independent to concentrate entirely on Massachusetts issues. As a Catholic organization, we support the teaching.
Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, one of the true icons of the pro-life movement, Miss Nellie Gray, passed away in 2012. And they searched around for someone who could fill her shoes, and we think we found that person. Her name is Jeannie Monahan. Well, welcome, Jeannie.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Jeannie, could you please speak first to the legacy that Nellie Gray left regarding the Right to Life movement and the March for Life, which is really an enormous event down in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, on that, just on your final note there, the March for Life is the largest pro-life